President Clinton has also decided that he will speak to the nation on this shortly after 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning, so stay with us. He may have some more information to pass along. Rita Braver reported a little while ago that he may change his weekly radio address, which was supposed to be on welfare reform, I believe she said, to include at least elements of what's happened here in Atlanta.
It's a big shock. It's a shock to the organizers here. It's a shock to people like President Clinton, who has already made 2 visits to Atlanta, one for the opening ceremonies here, at which we have said before there was also a security breach insofar as a man was discovered carrying weapons, a man in a security uniform was discovered carrying weapons within the Olympic Stadium on the day of the opening ceremony here. And the President came back to view, just as a fan, the women's gymnastics team on Thursday night. So this is an event that politicians take notice of, and to which they try to attach themselves, despite the long history of the Olympics and even previous terrorist attacks. It still has a very positive and connotation that politicians like to associate themselves with.
Also, at a time like this, the nation wants to hear from the President. The nation wants to be reassured that everything that could possibly be done to solve this heinous crime is being done, and everything that can be done to prevent its occurrence in the future is also being done. And I think that's probably what will wear most on the minds of Atlantans today is, how do we, if it happened once, how do we stop it from happening again?
Well, clearly those are the questions at the top of the mind of the security officials here, and presumably there'll also be some sort of government involvement in future discussions as to how events like this will be held, not just through the next week, but also in the future. And as well, we're likely to hear something from the top levels of government, including the White House, on this. And I understand that Rita Braver is standing by in Washington at the White House for the latest there. Rita?
Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. Bye. Here at the White House, we have just had a very short briefing by Micah McCurry, the President's press secretary. He has told us that the President will be doing his radio broadcast live, as we said he might. This time he'll do it right from the White House briefing room, and his attempt will be to try to reassure the public that everything is being done to try to figure out what happened in Atlanta. He will also, we understand, express his condolences to the victims, to their families. We are told that the President was awakened last night by Leon Panetta, his chief of staff, and informed about what was going on. We are also told that the President had several conversations with Vice President Gore, who, as you remember, was at the Olympics until very late last night. Of course, the President himself spent part of the day there earlier in the week. And Mr. Clinton spoke to Vice President Gore a couple of times, spoke to Mr. Panetta again, and has been having regular briefings. We're also told that there has been a team of administration officials at work on this all night. It includes Louis Freeh, the head of the FBI, who is expected to brief the President by telephone in just a minute or two. We are also told that the President is actually going to continue with his plan to go to Camp David for the rest of the weekend until he goes to Louisiana tomorrow, but he will be getting regular briefings there, and the White House says Mr. Clinton can continue to monitor the situation wherever he is. John?
Rita Braver at the White House, thank you. We should also mention that one of the prominent visitors of these Olympic Games here in Atlanta is a Georgia native, President Jimmy Carter, who was at the swimming venue last night when America won more gold at the pool, but the athletic endeavors of these Olympic Games have been markedly overshadowed by the events of last evening. And you wonder, Mark, will they be overshadowed for the rest of the games? Can these Olympic Games recover from an incident such as we had this morning?
I don't know that they can. It's often the case that Olympics become known for one event. The public doesn't seem to be able to maintain a perception over time, remembering more than one incident at the games, and there's been a history of that sort of thing. If you look back on the famous 72 games in Munich, what do you think of? You think of the terrorist kidnapping of the Israeli team.
Yes, you don't instantly think of Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals.
Yes, that's right. Or if you look back on L.A. or Moscow, you think about the various Cold War-related boycotts of the United States, of Moscow and the Soviet bloc of Los Angeles. When you look back at Seoul, Korea, you tend to think not of who won what, but of the famous Ben Johnson gold medal revoked for drug use in the men's 100-meter dash. There tends to be one thing that you recall from each Olympic Games, and I'm afraid that at this stage it seems the thing we'll recall about Atlanta was that loud and lethal bang at 1:25 this morning.
The story of this Games had been the Dream Teens, and an hour and 25 minutes after the Dream Team, the basketball team, completed yet another rout of their opponents at the Georgia Dome, is when the bang was heard. And you know, that venue got out at about midnight, and that venue holds about 20,000 people, if I recall correctly, and I'm sure that a good number of those people on their way back to the hotels, because the Georgia Dome is just over here to our left, and the Olympic Park is just over here behind us. A lot of those people would have probably passed through the park on the way back to their accommodations.
Well, I can reliably report that they did, because I was coming back from another area right at that time to our hotel in the middle, and that crowd was just swarming onto the streets and into that central area of here.
All right. Let's go back to Washington, and correspondent Jim Stewart again with more on the investigation. Jim?
John, we have a little bit more information now about that 911 call. We're told that call came in from a payphone approximately 2 blocks from the bomb site near a hotel. We don't know which hotel. We obviously don't have any other details about that. The FBI is checking out that phone booth at the time, currently though trying to get some fingerprints to see who made that call. To backtrack and explain again, the 911 call came before the bomb exploded to the Atlanta Police emergency number, and it was monitored. They have a call monitoring system there, and we're quickly able to trace it back to the phone booth. I think it's also, we've been reminded here of a search warrant of an event that took place in April. You may recall that some members of the so-called Georgia militia were arrested in April just south of Atlanta after they had made some unspecified threats about the Olympics and had made mention of bombs. They were charged with possession of illegal explosive devices, and those charges are still pending. It's interesting to note, though, that in the search warrant they were found to have in their possession quantities of potassium perchlorate, aluminum powder, pre-cut threaded pipe with washers and wires, assorted nails, screws and staples, pipe, electrical tape, items that are common to pipe bombs. Now, that's not to suggest, obviously, that any militia group or any organization was responsible so far. No one has taken credit. But this certainly has the earmarks of an explosive device that is readily available, or instructions for which are readily available anytime you hook up to the internet and start trolling through these militia chat groups. It's something that has concerned law enforcement for a long, long time. Frankly, they were worried that it was becoming just too easy for someone to read these instructions, go into their backyard literally, and take some items at hand and fashion together a bomb. What is known about this bomb so far is that it was put together with 3 pipe bombs in a military knapsack. It had on top of that a Tupperware container, we're told, a plastic food container that was filled with shrapnel. And when that exploded, obviously it caused the greatest amount of damage. That and the 911 call are what is the 2 things driving this investigation right now. They're interviewing the witnesses again, those who were injured and those who survived. Again, we're told that there are no firm hard leads. No one is being questioned at this moment, that we're told. Investigators still gathering all the facts. John?
Jim Stewart in Washington, thanks very much. We have the identity of one of the victims now, Mark.
Yes, it turns out that the man who died of a heart attack, he was not a direct victim of the explosion. That was a woman who was actually killed by the force of the blast, but subsequent to that, a man died of a heart attack in the commotion and confusion that followed the blast. It turned out that he was actually a working journalist, working perhaps too hard at the time, died of a heart attack. His name is Melil Uzulyol. He is a Turkish cameraman. He was 40 years old, had 2 daughters, and a history of heart trouble. The casualty figures, just to go over them one more time: 2 people have died as a direct consequence of the bomb. One by the force of the blast, a woman, and another, this cameraman, a Turkish cameraman, 40-year-old father of two, who died of a heart attack in the aftermath. Also, about 110 people suffering various degrees of injuries, some serious enough to be brought into intensive care and operating rooms, others with just scratches and bruises.
We're going to take a short break coming up in just a few seconds to allow some of our other CBS stations to join us along the line. Here's what we know so far. 1:25 this morning, an explosive device crafted out of 3 pipe bombs and a Tupperware container loaded full of shrapnel exploded at the Centennial Olympic Park in the heart of downtown Atlanta, and these 26th Olympic celebrations marking the centennial of the modern Olympic Games. CBS News continuing coverage of this explosion in Atlanta. We'll be back in just a moment.
And we're going to be breaking away from our network coverage for just a few moments to speak one-on-one with someone who was actually at that concert last night when the bomb went off.
So we're going now to an employee at our sister station in Atlanta. This is Tanya Dunham. She is an assistant assignment editor and a production assistant for WGNX in Atlanta. Good morning, Tanya. How are you?
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
You've had an eventful last few hours.
Oh, yes. Very eventful here.
Tell us a little about what happened last night. It seemed to be quite a bit going on.
Oh, yeah, I was just downtown at the Centennial Park trying to, check out some of the music that was going on, and actually I started to walk away, and the next thing you know, it was just a big boom. It shook the ground and shook me up and shook everybody up, and police officers and military officials were at that time asking everybody to leave the park. And I stood there for a second in shock because I wasn't sure what it was at first, and next thing you know, everybody was running from the front of the concert toward where I was, me and my friends, and I just turned on the camera and started videotaping what I could and left before something else blew up or something.
Tanya, we appreciate you joining us today. If I could ask you to please speak up a little bit louder so we can hear you just a little better.
Okay.
The reports that we're receiving say that there was a warning of this bomb phoned in before the bomb actually exploded. Did it seem to you like police were trying to clear people out of there before you actually heard the boom?
No. At the time where I was at, I did not see any strange or unusual activities from the police officers or any military officials at that time.
Now, Tanya, how close were you to the stage, the actual explosion site?
I was on the side of it, practically in the back of it, almost to the back of it when the explosion happened.
Now, we saw some of the pictures that showed a big spark, and a lot of people are saying that they thought it was part of the concert at the time. Was that your impression when it actually happened?
No, that wasn't my impression at first, no. No, I actually thought it was a bomb, and I was trying to rule it out at first, but when I saw everybody running the way they were, that was it.
Some of the wire reports that I've been reading this morning, Tanya, people are quoted as saying that they saw rivers of blood and very dramatic scene there. Are you surprised that more people weren't injured or killed by what happened?
No, I'm not surprised at about that. I'm surprised that 2 people were killed, but I didn't see any smoke or any fire after the bomb exploded.
Did it seem... Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Did it seem like a massive explosion to you, or are those reports a little exaggerated?
It sounded like you know how an F-16 plane would pass by real fast and they give you the sonic boom after the end, after it passes, and that's exactly what it sounded like, some type of warplane. But it just shook the ground and shook the buildings around, and like I said, it just startled everybody at first.
Now, Tanya, you have a unique perspective on this, being in television yourself.
Right.
What is the city like down there? Give us a perspective on what's going on down there. What are you hearing throughout Atlanta?
Well, right now there's a lot of reporters on the scene and getting to the people who are going to the venues as for track and field, and people are waking up to the news now. But it's not stopping anybody from going out to their tickets they bought. It's quiet and kind of still, and shock still.
Are you yourself going to be attending any of the events today?
No, actually I need some sleep.
Okay, well, Tanya, thank you very much. We appreciate you getting up this morning and talking to us about this.
Oh, I've been up all night long.
Well, thank you very much again. And we will, of course, be checking back with network news now to get the latest on what's happening in Atlanta. Thank you again. That was Tanya Dunham from Atlanta, WGNX. Back now to network news with CBS.
You couldn't meet This was the
Yeah,
problem.
it kind of was like she has so many people bothering her all the time. I didn't want to be another person.
And nobody's bothering you, right?
Well,
That was Janet Evans, an Olympic swimmer who was being interviewed when the blast went off, and you could hear it and see it in the background. A piece of extraordinary film that happened, or tape I should say, in this age of videotape, at just the time that the blast was going on. Some of the other facts as we have them, we're told it broke windows and buildings around the park and was felt more than a quarter of a mile away. We're told that the FBI has identified the phone booth where the 911 call to the Atlanta police was made. They are, of course, checking that booth and all of the other telephone booths around that site, we're told, for fingerprints. At this time, of course, we have no information as to what they've come up with yet on that. We also do not know exactly what the caller who made the call to 911 said. But Jim Stewart, our Justice Department correspondent, is the one who first discovered that information. Let's go now to Jim. He's in Washington. Jim, what can you tell us?
Well, Bob, you couldn't pick a place with more federal law enforcement agents concentrated than in this section of Atlanta when this bomb went off. Here's what we know so far. A policeman was summoned to an altercation in the downtown venue, the Centennial venue, and once there discovered what is described to us as a military-style knapsack. He became suspicious of this knapsack and called federal authorities who oversee the bomb demolition or disposal teams and asked for help. Those teams arrived apparently in conjunction with 3 dog teams which were roaming throughout the area. 11 minutes after they arrived, and shortly after they began urging people to back away from this knapsack, it exploded. Now, we are told that inside that knapsack were 3 pipe bombs, definitive pipe bombs with threads and ends that they have already established in their laboratories, came from the classic pipe bomb that's described throughout the computer internet system that the police have been so concerned about lately. On top of those 3 pipe bombs was a plastic food container described by one person as a Tupperware container filled with homemade shrapnel, bits of nails and pieces of metal that exploded outward and apparently caused the most damage among the 110 people who have been injured. Now, right before this blast took place at 1:25 a.m. Eastern Time in Atlanta, we're told that a caller made a call to the 911 emergency police number in Atlanta from a pay phone booth approximately 2 blocks away from the park near a hotel. Now, this person, we don't know whether it was a man, a woman, or anything else about this caller, delivered information about this package, enough so that they are convinced or strongly leaning in the direction that the call and the explosion are connected. Beyond that, what are they doing? They are interviewing right now the people who survived this blast, many of whom had their video cameras and still cameras at work there. They have gone to the hospitals, Piedmont and Grady Hospital, to interview people who were injured rather, to see if they remember who may have left this knapsack. And they are also going back now and reviewing the tape from scores of overhead cameras that are perched atop light poles throughout the downtown Atlanta area that were part of this elaborate security system that they had put in place for the Olympic Games, hoping once again to see if they have any evidence of who may have left that knapsack. It should be pointed out, however, that this was an area that was open to the public. You didn't have to have a pass to get in here. Anybody could, and apparently did, wander in. Bob?
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Let me ask you just one question. Other than that they think that the call that came in on 911 was connected to this, do you have any other information about exactly what the caller said, or was it someone taking credit for it? Was it a warning? What else do you know about that?
Bob, the only operative word that's been used to describe this call to me is that it was explosion related. And that obviously could be any number of things. I think the fact that's important, though, is that it came before their explosion, and it was specific enough so that they have tied the 2 events together. Bob?
Well, there's no question that the person or persons who did this had in mind hurting or injuring people. In military parlance, you would call this an anti-personnel bomb. It had nails, it had metal fragments in it. This is meant to hurt people. This was not a demonstration bomb, just something to make a noise and go off. Do you, Jim, recall in any of the recent terrorist incidents we've had, or in incidents like in Oklahoma City, were there bombs similar to this?
They have had pipe bombs that have been planted in law enforcement officers' cars. Pipe bombs and descriptions for pipe bombs are rampant throughout the militia movement, but I want to quickly add there's no evidence here that this is a militia-related incident. Bob?
All right. Thank you very much, Jim Stewart. To recap, 2 people hurt, or 2 people killed, more than 100 people hurt when this bomb went off in downtown Atlanta at the Centennial Park. We want to go back now to John Roberts and to Mark Phillips, who've been covering this story all night from Atlanta. We also want to remind you that the President, at just a little after 10 o'clock this morning, Eastern Time, is going to address the nation on this. So let's go now to our correspondents in Atlanta.
Good morning to you, Bob, and here's what we could tell you from Atlanta. The Centennial Olympic Park, the adjacent Coca-Cola Olympic City, and the entire area for 3 or 4 blocks surrounding that entire area has been shut down to vehicular traffic, shut down to pedestrian traffic. Nothing is getting in or getting out this morning as agents from the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms continue their pursuit of exactly who might be responsible for this bomb. They know what it was, now they want to know who it was. You can hear the helicopters flying overhead. Blimps have been flying around all night. They have been trying to ensure that the perimeter around this area is secure, that nobody gets in or out, so that they can chase this down to the absolute best of their abilities. We heard from the IOC this morning. Secretary General Francois Carrad said that the Olympic Games are going to go off as scheduled today. In fact, the events should already be a little more than an hour old. He said that there would be a moment of silence this morning to pay tribute to the 2 victims of this heinous crime. As well, the Olympic flags at all of the venues would be lowered to half-mast. The big question right now in Atlanta is how are they going to respond to this terrorist attack, as it's being called by the FBI. Mark Phillips has some more information on that.
Well, the question right from really from 125 this morning would be how would this change the nature of these games. It was within a couple of hours that the International Olympic Committee, along with Atlanta organizers, announced that the games would go ahead with this moment of silence that you mentioned, with the flags, in fact, at half-staff. But right now they've also determined that the mayor of Atlanta has determined that the Olympic Park, where this bomb went off, will in fact be reopened once it has been sanitized and swept and the investigators are through there. But we're going to go back now as well to the immediate moments after the blast. This place was filled with about 50,000 people watching a concert, partying in the Olympic spirit when this blast went off, and this was the reaction that they had.
There was this loud explosion and everybody jumped. And then I looked across and I saw like white smoke going up in the air.
But we heard the explosion, felt the ground shake, and I mean, it was obvious. Everybody there knew what it was. It was total crazy. I mean, everybody just freaked out. Everybody took off running. I mean, there was nobody that had any idea what was. Everybody just took off.
What did you see in the car?
People that were in there, man?
Just the smoke. Everybody was running, laying around,
and it just blew up like a big noise, right? And it was just kind of like a shake noise, and then like just off to the side of us was like smoke.
To me, it looked like a big burst of light. It was orange in appearance, smoke instantly following thereafter. It all happened very fast.
You could feel the boom and the ground shook, you know, and I don't know. It's hard. It's quite scary, quite scary.
So a shockwave of more than one type swept through Atlanta. That was about 1:25 this morning. Within a very short period of time, the rescue and emergency services were on the scene, as were police officers. The rescue services moving through the park saying, if you can walk, follow me and leave the area. That got people out of the park area. The great fear at the time being that there might have been more than one bomb. It also isolated the people which had been injured, and sadly one of those people who had been injured died on the site. Another death occurred, that on the part of a journalist, a television cameraman working for a Turkish television network, who died of a heart attack in the excitement that followed the blast. So 2 deaths being directly attributed to this blast. The number of injuries put at around or about 110. Some of them quite serious. Operations were performed, people in intensive care as a result. Most of those injuries being of the shrapnel type. This pipe bomb that Jim Stewart was describing, 3 pipe bombs. Here we see the people who were affected by them. Created an awful lot of shrapnel. The pipes blowing up as the explosion went off. These pictures taken very shortly after the blast itself. The doctors in the hospital saying that the types of injuries they're seeing were consistent with shrapnel injuries, bodies torn apart and that sort of thing.
The place that this satchel was left was just about at the base of a tower which contains sound and lighting equipment for the concert that was going on stage at the AT&T Global Olympic Village. If you have ever been to a concert before, whether indoor or outdoor, you'll know that those type of towers always seem very benign. People crowd right up around them. It was thanks to the quick work of a police officer who was called to deal with some unruly patrons to the Olympic Park that perhaps more lives were spared and that not as many were lost. He spotted this suspicious package and started evacuating the area. He had just a short few minutes of time to try to get people out before the bomb went off. We want to point out, though, that this has no connection to the Olympic Village where the athletes are housed. This is a very public area. The Olympic Village, the Athletes Village, is a short distance north of here at Georgia Tech. It's surrounded by a 10-foot high wire fence that has motion detectors. It is surrounded at the top by a high voltage electric fence. It's designed as almost a fortress so that no one can get in or get out. This was the public area that was affected.
This was the area the Olympic party was supposed to happen in, and the question now is whether the Olympics, any Olympics, in a free society can afford to have this kind of open, uncontrolled area. There were no security cordons around it, no screening of people or material being brought into it, and the result has been that somebody brought a bomb into it.
And it seems as though that's going to change because when the Olympic Park reopens, it will reopen with increased security. Bob?
Thank you very much, fellows, and good work through the night. John Roberts and Mark Phillips have been on this story since the moment that the bomb went off. We've been on the air all night with it. The American Red Cross tells us they are fielding calls for people checking in on relatives. If you would like to check on a relative, there is a toll-free number you can call. We want to give that to you now. The number is 888-685-8285. 888-685-8285. That is the American Red Cross. They are fielding calls from people who are concerned about relatives or want information. We're going to go next to our Washington Bureau, where I'm told that Noel Cook, who is an expert on this sort of thing, he is a former Defense Department official, and he has been heavily involved in security in previous Olympics, and we want to get his thoughts as to what he makes of all this. Are you there, Mr. Cook?
Yes, sir.
If memory serves, you were at Seoul, where you worked on the security, and where else was it?
Well, I was in the Pentagon during the '84 Olympics in Los Angeles, and my company did the vulnerability assessments for the security at Seoul.
I guess the first thing I would ask you is, what do you make of this so far?
Well, I don't think it was unexpected. I think it's a little early to tell what to make of it. It doesn't look like a well-planned terrorist event. It looks like something that was spontaneous or done on the spur of the moment by local people. It looks like a rather amateurish threat. The bomb itself, in order to get the level of explosive that they wanted to get, evidently they couldn't get it in one device. They had to use more than one. This is a device or a series of devices in an incident that looks like it was planned out of a cookbook.
But just judging from the bomb itself and how it was made, that's what leads you to believe that perhaps it was kind of an amateur attempt rather than something carefully coordinated.
That's correct. And the spray pattern, it sounds like, from what we're hearing from the news reports, that most of the injuries are leg wounds. It doesn't sound like a very well-made bomb.
Well, clearly it was not just something someone did for a demonstration. This was an anti-personnel weapon because they put nails and pieces of metal in it. Whoever set this off wanted to hurt people, it would seem.
No, it was obviously intended to do damage, and it did damage. And I think there'll be some criticism of the security in Atlanta as a result of this, but it should be kept in mind that a larger number of people could have been hurt, and security seemed to work pretty well, limiting the number of casualties.
Well, along with that, in fact, the police had spotted this satchel or knapsack or whatever it was that the bomb was in, and thought it was a suspicious package, and had already called the bomb squad, I suppose, and I think it went off 11 minutes after they found it. So apparently they were on it pretty quickly, and apparently, or obviously, they had begun to evacuate some people. So One thing, let me ask you about this. I've just been told that a Justice Department spokesman says that since the games began in Atlanta, they've had about 120 abandoned or suspicious particles that have been picked up by security. We're told now that they are questioning witnesses. They're inspecting home video made by those in the crowd, going through videotape from overhead surveillance cameras. So it may well be that one of those cameras may lend some information about this. This may well be on somebody's tape somewhere. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it's possible. As we've seen from the situation of the police beating in Los Angeles, everybody today has a video camera, everybody's shooting, and you just have to gather all this stuff together and look at it and see if it produces anything. But left packages are a very common situation in any crowd, and particularly with a group of this magnitude. I'm surprised they haven't found more bags that were lost or left behind.
Well, obviously everybody has the jitters now, but do you think it was wise for them to go ahead with the games?
I think you have a choice now. We can say that these events are going to close down the Olympics, they're going to close down major public gatherings, or we're going to continue in spite of them. I think we have to continue in spite of them, and I think we're going to end up viewing this thing as part of the cost of doing business in the world that we face today.
Strictly, I know nobody likes outside advice, but do you have any advice at this point for the people down there?
Well, no, I'm not involved in the games, so I don't think I have the right to offer advice. I've been down there, I've talked to officials down there as long ago as 2 years ago. We looked at what they were doing, and clearly they have a very difficult job. They have, I think, probably far too many security personnel to try to command and control and coordinate in a very small area. So it's a difficult job, and I think they're doing the best they can do.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mr. Cook. We appreciate you coming by this morning. Let's go back to Atlanta now, where John Roberts is standing by. John?
Thanks very much, Bob. Some people, extraordinarily enough, are just hearing about this event this morning. Most of us who were in the area of downtown Atlanta heard about it as it happened at 1:25 this morning. Nancy Norman and Milton Baker are just down here. You just drove in this morning. You hadn't heard anything about this?
I hadn't heard a thing. 15 minutes ago I found out.
What was your reaction when you heard about it?
A little shock. As we walked through, we were asking people to find a restroom, as a matter of fact, and we went to the Olympic City, and they said, oh, they won't be open the rest of the day. And I was a little, didn't understand that at all. I thought, oh yeah, we come on the one day everything's closed. Finally ran into some other gentlemen down here that we had asked if they knew where a restroom was, and they said, yeah, and they said, did you hear about the bombing? And I was flabbergasted. I had no idea, none whatsoever.
What went through your mind when you heard that a bomb had gone off here?
I have some family visiting from Ohio down here, and I'm a little worried about them. I don't know. I still haven't really been clued in on everything that went on last night or this morning. It worries me. It really worries me. I'm worried about being here, but I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to try to enjoy my day.
All right. You came out from Jacksonville, Florida. Milton, you came down from Roswell, Georgia, not that far away. When did you hear about this?
We heard just before we left early this morning. My daughter, Heather, was watching TV and said she heard that a bomb had gone off.
And you decided to come anyway? You didn't have second thoughts?
I had second thoughts, but I think it's worth coming to the Olympics, even though there's been some crazy people wandering around.
Mm-hmm. The Olympics has tried to be such a showcase for this part of Georgia. Now that this has happened, does it taint that showcase?
Well, I hope that everybody views the Olympics for the 17 days, and if there's no more problems, perhaps it's a tragedy, but perhaps they'll view it for the 17 days and not one incident that some crazy person decided to get a little publicity over.
Nancy, are you planning on staying?
We'll be here for the day, as far as I know. Like I said, we just found out within the last 15-20 minutes. I really haven't talked about it with the rest of my group yet, so I'm hoping to stay. It's not going to happen to me, so why not? I'm gonna enjoy the day.
All right. Had you seen this Olympic park on television?
I've seen it on television. We drove by the torch. That's the thing that everybody was ooh ah. It was wonderful to see the torch. I guess it still hasn't hit home that I'm even here. Once in a lifetime chance. So that's why we're here.
All right. Nancy Norman, Milton Baker, thanks for being with us this morning. And as Nancy said, she saw this on television. Many other millions of people around the world have been seeing this Olympic Park on television. They are familiar with it because it has been the center of so much celebration during these Olympic Games, and so many broadcast organizations around the world have brought this into many people's homes. So, Bob, this really is hitting home for a lot of people today.
All right, thank you very much, John. Because so many of you are joining us across the nation, you're just getting up on a Saturday morning, we want to keep you up to date and provide a summary from time to time for those of just joining us. To recap, there was a bomb explosion about 1:25 this morning at Olympic Centennial Park in Atlanta. 2 people are dead, one a cameraman for Turkish television, the other a woman not yet identified. More than 100 injured, many with lacerations and fractures, many of them with shrapnel wounds. This bomb went off in the midst of a crowd that was gathered to hear a free concert. Investigators say there were 3 pipe bombs in what was described as a military-style knapsack, along with a Tupperware container filled with nails. This was a bomb meant to hurt people. Someone called 911 a few minutes before the blast. Evacuation efforts began, but it was too late. The International Olympic Committee says that the games will go on, just as they did at Munich in 1972 when terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes. President Clinton was awakened and informed shortly after the explosion. He's going to address the nation just a little after 10 o'clock this morning. CBS News, of course, will carry that live. Earlier today, CBS News talked with some of the doctors who treated some of the wounded, most of which we're told had shrapnel wounds. Here's part of that interview.
Well, we've seen a couple of long bone fractures. We've seen a femur fracture and a tibia fracture. We're going to be taking to the operating room tonight. I mean, on a fairly non-emergent basis, probably in the next hour or 2.
About how many patients have you seen?
We've seen about 4 or 5 patients so far. But like I said, we only see patients if they've already been seen and evaluated, and then we see them.
Any sense of how many in the emergency room? How many are being treated in the emergency room, or how many have been brought in the last hour or so?
Maybe a couple dozen. Yeah,
a couple of dozen.
We've seen about 20 people being treated, but the injuries range from very minor to serious. So.
What is the most?
Is it shrapnel?
Any fatality?
We've seen a lot of shrapnel injury, yeah. But like I said, we're not seeing everyone. We're just seeing a few people.
The doctors who treated some of the first victims brought to the hospital. We want to tell you once again that the Red Cross is providing a toll-free number that you can call for information about relatives or people in Atlanta. That number is 888-685-8285. That's the American Red Cross. They are happy to take calls from people inquiring about those in Atlanta. Let's go now to the White House. Rita Braver, our White House correspondent, is standing by. Now, Rita, the president is going to talk about 10:05 this morning.
That's right. It's actually 10:06. That's the time that he gives a radio address every week. Today, he will go into the White House briefing room and do this before cameras. Officials here say that he wants to express his condolences to the victims, to the families of the people who died, and also to give Americans a sense that law enforcement is doing everything it can to find out who did this. As you mentioned before, the president was briefed all through the night, and he was supposed to be getting a briefing from FBI Director Louis Freeh by telephone sometime within the last hour. Reporters asked Mike McCurry, the president's press secretary, what the president's response was when he heard about the bomb. We're told that he first asked about the security procedures and was reassured that everything had been in place ahead of time and that the response teams were on the job. We're also told that he expressed outrage that anyone could have done something like this. One thing that is happening here is that the White House is having to juggle collecting information about this at the very time that they're collecting information about the TWA crash. And we ask, those conference calls have been going on twice a day, every day. Would they continue? The answer was yes, but officials here say now some of those same people will be involved in trying to get information about what happened in Atlanta. I also want to mention to you that, there was an arrest a few months ago of some militia members. At the time, Jim Stewart reported that there might have been some mention about the Olympics, and the White House and other places tried to put a damper on that. But today I was told by a senior Justice Department official that, in fact, they are reviewing that investigation, studying every aspect of it to see if there could be a possible link. Bob?
Well, thank you very much, Rita. Of course, the obvious question, and I ask this only because I'm a reporter and it's the obvious question to ask, has anyone made any connection at this point between the TWA crash and this incident that's happened in Atlanta?
You're right. Everybody is asking that very question, but we are told that there is no link whatsoever at this time, Bob.
Noel Cook, who's an expert on this kind of thing, who used to be a Defense Department official, told us just a little while ago that in his view, this might have been the work of amateurs. He said this kind of bomb is sort of made out of a cookbook. It's not the sort of thing that sophisticated is the word, that a sophisticated terrorist would use. Is that sort of thinking going on at the White House also?
I don't really know what the White House considers a professional terrorist to be. I've covered terrorism for many years, having covered the Justice Department myself. Most of the law enforcement officials I speak to say that somebody who is intent on terror automatically becomes a professional by trying to scare people and trying to harm people, Bob.
All right, let's go, Rita, let's go down to Atlanta now. Mark Phillips, who's been on this story since the very beginning and through the night, is back. Mark, what can you tell us about this terrorist aspect of this?
Well, the investigation has been proceeding right through the evening. Within moments of the bomb going off, this massive security apparatus that's been assembled here for the games leapt into action. People in the Centennial Olympic Park where this bomb exploded around a bandstand around something called the Global Olympic Village, which is basically a bandstand which we're now having, well, in fact, what we're now looking at is the previous Olympic Terrorist Act in Munich in 1972, which is the point from which really the age of innocence of the Olympic Games ended. This was, people will recall, an incident where members of the Israeli Olympic team were kidnapped and ultimately killed by Palestinian terrorists from the Black September group. That was the incident, subsequent to which the entire nature in terms of security of these Olympic Games changed. Security has been increased step by step, games by games, ever since that point. Now we find ourselves here in Atlanta in 1996 with the second terrorist attack on an Olympic Games. There are several significant differences, mind you, between the Munich attack and this one. The Munich attack was on a specific Olympic venue, the Athletes' Village, where the athletes were staying. It was related to, we knew who was doing it. It was related to an international political situation in the Middle East. The attack was specifically targeted at the Israelis and specifically at an Olympic venue. What's different about this one is that this attack was not at an official Olympic venue. This was at a public park created by the city of Atlanta as a place for these throngs, tens of thousands, I would venture to say yesterday evening, perhaps as many as 100, even more, 1,000 people in the general vicinity of central Atlanta pouring through that park. It's estimated that 50,000 people were watching the concert at which this bomb went off. The decision was made here at these games to provide some sort of a social focal point, a place where people who weren't holding tickets for that day's events could go and watch them on large screen TVs, a place where they could just go and feel a part of the Olympic festivities that were going along here. This was the soft security underbelly of the games. That's where this terrorist struck. Investigators have been poring over that scene ever since, looking for the evidence. This is how they now know that this was a pipe bomb. This is how they now know that this was a pipe bomb that had a food container full of shrapnel, bits of metal, nails, and that kind of thing, which spread through the crowd. We also know that there was something of a warning, that there was 10 or 11 minutes of warning, both because there was a telephone call from a 911 to a 911 number. That call apparently was made from a payphone not very far from this area that you're now looking at, perhaps 2 blocks, maybe 500 yards from where those investigators have been working right through the night and the early morning hours. Payphones have been set up all over central Atlanta at an intersection just outside of the Olympic Park area, just in the area where those huge crowds were operating and where many of Atlanta's hotels are situated. That's where the call appears to have been made from. The FBI have tracked the call, the 911 call, to those telephones, and they have now taken those telephones away, presumably to dust them for further fingerprints as they continue their search for clues in this mess in the wake of this bomb. Bob?
Mark, as you pointed out, the security...
Good morning once again, everyone. It's 9:29, 62 degrees outside. You're watching Eyewitness News and special coverage of the bombing in Atlanta. We're going to be breaking away from our network coverage now for a moment to bring you some local angles to this story. Now, of course, word of the tragic explosion at the Olympics has spread quickly, with concern for the people already there in Atlanta, as well as those heading there.
That's right. We have reporter Mike Shue on his way to Atlanta to do some coverage for our station on this event. Before he left, though, he caught up with several passengers at BWI Airport boarding a flight bound for that Olympic city.
How close to where that happened were you last night?
Oh, we were at Olympic Stadium and coming back to the hotel when it went off.
What did you think about it? Did you hear it?
No. No. Just heard about it after it was over.
When you heard about it, what thoughts went through your mind?
It's time to go home.
Your flight, well, you were supposed to be down there longer?
No, we actually planned to stay, and we stayed outside so we wouldn't be in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And we were there all day at the same place during the day, and security everywhere.
We're a little nervous and concerned, as I'm sure everyone who's headed toward Atlanta is. But we're going anyway. We're excited to see the events and to have some fun and see what it's all about.
Hopefully that was just one person, and feel badly for the people who were there last night. It puts a real cloud over them, especially people who lost their lives. But we're going to go and try and make the best of it. Goosebumps and all.
I was at BWI yesterday, and some of the airlines were asking passengers to arrive 30 to 45 minutes ahead of time, give some extra time, actually, leave earlier than usual, because they were saying because of the additional security concerns. And now we understand there are also additional flight delays in Atlanta, so people are probably going to want to leave even earlier than that.
Really, and of course, all this, of course, is the result of the aftermath initially from Flight 800, TWA Flight 800, which of course now is raising new questions in the minds of many of the travelers, because we've already determined now that that in fact was a bomb. So now we're into Atlanta and the same thing's happening. Such a bittersweet event. It's something that was supposed to be so happy, especially this was in the Centennial Village. This was down in the middle of a concert, for those of you just joining us or are not aware of what's happening, and now this happens. So we did speak, though, just a little while ago with Tanya Dunham. She is with our sister station, the CBS affiliate in Atlanta, and she had some interesting words.
Yeah, she was at the Centennial Park actually watching this concert that was occurring last night when the bomb exploded, and here's what she had to say.
A big boom, boom, you know, and it shook the ground. In fact, if I could see well, it probably shook the buildings, too. And I stood there for a second, everybody's looking around in the sky, and next thing you know, all the police officers came around telling everybody to get out of the park now. And it was just so forceful the way they were talking to everybody and how they were moving. Everybody got scared, and of course everybody started moving out away from the park. Everybody was thinking it was probably an electrical type thing because of the concert and the videos, and you know, it's real pretty out there. So we were thinking it might have been something that exploded in the speakers or something, but it would have never done what it done, like an earthquake. There was a couple people in the street that were bleeding real bad. In fact, the bomb was so intense it picked some people up off their feet, you know, threw them off their feet.
You know, it's devastating, because as you were saying, this is supposed to be an uplifting time when everyone comes together in peace to compete at the games, and now we're going to have this image in our head, just like you have that image on the balcony from Munich in '72.
We were just talking, of course, most people will remember that particular event. I remember being pretty young and watching it, not really knowing what was going on, only knowing that something was wrong, you know, in the middle of those Olympic Games. But of course, hopefully this will not keep these games from going on as planned without putting a real damper on the event. So,
and as in Munich in '72, they went on ahead, and they have determined now, the Olympic Committee has determined that they indeed are going to go straight on with the events today, and they're not going to let this stop any of the competition.
And expect during the day, too, to have a moment of silence throughout the games at different points throughout the day. And the flags, of course, throughout the Olympic Village will be flying at half-staff. So that's going to be pretty dramatic. I'm sure that will be certainly brought to you tonight at 6 o'clock with Kai Jackson and Pat Warren. We've also identified, I don't think I've heard them mention with Network, that this one of the people killed was a 40-year-old Turkish cameraman. He was actually a journalist working in the Olympic Village at the time. They say he died of a heart attack en route to the hospital. He leaves behind 2 daughters. So, of course, this has already taken international proportions as far as the people involved, of course, as it would.
And the other victim, all we know at this point is that was a female, a woman who also was nearby, obviously.
Right. Well, right here in town, of course, you can expect live coverage of an implosion. Very, very much talked about implosion going on in Lexington Terrace. That's going to happen in just about 22 minutes. We'll bring it to you live. We have team coverage, crews all over the place downtown. We have Kai Jackson and Kelly Saunders and Ron Matz. I tell you, we have a lot going on down there, but we will bring you that live at 10 o'clock as scheduled, barring some mishap down there that would delay it. But of course, we'll have that coming to you live. And right now, though, 9:39, it's about 62 degrees, and we're going back now to network coverage with CBS, and we'll join you in a little while.
It points to a homemade version, a homemade terrorist, if you will. And that spells to me the people who have been talking the most about this lately, the people who frankly had pointed at the Olympic Games and said, here is another example of American going international, who the ZOG, this occupied government being taken over by world interest, and the Atlanta Games are just another example of that. There's been a lot of talk about that in the militia networks, and we don't want to throw stones in that direction unnecessarily, but clearly they have talked about it. Clearly some of them did more than talk. They planned and talked about the Olympic Games and built bombs to disseminate. They were arrested in April. Those charges still pending. Bob?
Okay, Jim, we should also point out there have been no arrests at this point that we know of in connection with this. Certainly no law enforcement agency has announced any. There also, as far as we know, have been no claims of responsibility, at least no claims that have been announced by law enforcement authorities. 2 people dead, about 100 people injured when this bomb went off about 1:25 this morning in the Olympic Centennial Park. Let's go back there now to John Roberts. John?
Good morning, Bob. This incident is the most serious incident to occur at an Olympic Games since 1972 and what happened in Munich with the Israeli athletes and coaches. That took place in the Olympic Village. This took place in a different type of village. This was in the AT&T Global Village, more along the lines of Marshall McLuhan's idea of the Global Village, where communication strings us all together. That's what that little village was all about, and it was at the heart of the Centennial Olympic Park, which is at the heart of the celebrations in downtown Atlanta. They have been giving concerts every night since the 20th, which is the day after opening ceremonies, and in fact they had a prelude concert a couple of days before that with Kenny Rogers. So this is the quality and the caliber of entertainment they're providing in an attempt to lure people down there. This is an area where people can go if they don't have tickets. This is an area where people can go if they are just coming back from a venue. And a game with the Dream Team at the Georgia Dome had just let out an hour and 20 minutes before this explosion took place. This is not the Athletes Village, unlike 1972. The Athletes Village is about a quarter to a half mile north of here. It is surrounded by a perimeter fence that's 10 feet high. It's wired with 2 different types of motion detectors and ringed around the top with high voltage electric fencing, and it has gates and security checkpoints, and you just can't get in there unless you've got the right pass. This was a very open and public area. This was an area where people could walk in and out of. It did have controlled access. There were only 3 entrances to it, and there are certain areas of this Centennial Olympic Park where you can't get through unless you have the proper pass. But by and large, you can walk in with just about anything under your arm. The only thing that they were looking for was something that might look like a suspicious package. I walked through there a number of times on my way back to the hotel from work with a satchel over my shoulder, my computer bag in my other hand. Nobody has ever asked to check that gear, and certainly with the number of people walking in and out, it would create somewhat of a plug at the entranceways, and people wouldn't be able to get in. But what we may see in the future, now that the Olympic organizers here in Atlanta have said that it will reopen under increased security, is perhaps something like we've seen at the actual Olympic venues, where every person, ticket holder, pass holder, official, delegate, dignitary, whatever, goes through magnetometers, metal detectors, and as well, their bags are searched. We may start to see something like that in the near future here at the Centennial Olympic Park, because frankly, Bob, they can't afford to have something like this happen one more time here in Atlanta.
Let me ask you this question, and the FBI, by the way, is calling it, they're saying what they intend to do, John, is sanitize the area, which means, I suppose that's like when the president is going to speak somewhere. Before they let anybody into the room, they make everybody in the room, the camera crews, the media, leave the room. They come in with the dogs who sniff for explosives and things like that, but they say it will be sanitized, all of the venues. Let me ask you, and this is a question I should know the answer to, but the days seem to run together. Was the president there last night, or was it the night before?
No, Bob, he was here on Thursday night as well. He was here at the opening ceremonies. Former President Jimmy Carter was at some events last night. I ran into him at the swimming competition. So it is a full day after President Clinton visited the Olympic site. But it's true what you say about sanitizing. There are probably more bomb dogs here than there are actually dogs as pets. And a lot of those dogs are going through the area now. They pulled some in from Hartsfield Airport where they were stationed to go through the area and make sure that there is nothing that even resembles an explosive device that could be sitting around in the park somewhere. Their greatest fear was that they would let people back in and another one would go off. And then they will probably implement these higher security precautions. And I think the whole atmosphere downtown here is going to change.
Well, it's obviously beginning to rain very hard. I see you look like you're caught in a squall there. Is that going to make it more difficult for the security people?
Well, it certainly might make it more difficult for the ATF agents who are going over the area where the bomb went off with a fine-tooth comb, just looking for as much evidence as they possibly can. Earlier in the day, Mark Phillips was saying that even though a pipe bomb is a crude and rudimentary type of device, sometimes there are little signatures, serial numbers on bits and pieces of the plumbing that this might have been put together with that could lead investigators in a certain direction. So they want to make sure that they've got all of that. The rain probably won't last too long, as it never does here in Georgia, so it shouldn't hamper their efforts too much.
Okay, John, we're going to let you get to a little dry place for just a minute there. We would remind you that President Clinton is going to address the nation about 10:05 this morning. This is the time he normally records his Saturday radio address. That will be on radio and television this morning. The president, of course, will talk about the situation in Atlanta. We want to look now at some of the interviews of people who were eyewitnesses to all this. These were recorded earlier this morning in Atlanta.
People were bleeding and everything, and I was bleeding. I was in so much pain that I couldn't run, but Donna helped me. Donna helped me because the guy said get on the ground, but we were so scared. We didn't know if another bomb would go off or whatever it was would happen again.
Did you see anybody in worse condition than you were?
Yeah, here at the hospital, yeah. I saw a guy, his hand looked like like something went through it. Blood was everywhere. His hand was really bad.
We were just sitting there watching the concert,
like nothing ever,
and we just thought it was, was part of the sound effects. And then when we saw everybody just running and falling, we knew that something had happened. But the explosion was so loud.
The bang, it was 1 meter like this from 100, which was all red. And it was, and then afterwards, after the things came down, also some powder fell in my eyes, and it was 5 minutes later.
The smoke and some people froze, and some people panicked and ran. A few people got hurt, trampled. I heard some girl had blood down her face, whatever, but I've heard other reports. This other lady, she talked to her, she said the people spread all over the place.
What'd you do when it happened?
Well, I gathered my kids up and stayed away from trash cans,
Well, I was just watching the music, admiring the scenery, the big screen TVs and so forth, and there was an explosion that kind of sounded like, maybe a fireworks explosion, but it's about 30 feet to the right of me, and I realized that people were falling down around me. I did turn around to think it's time to go, and that's when I found someone laying in front of me. And I had to help him and hold his hand. He was a nice young gentleman, about 22 or 23, and he had a big slash in his stomach as well as like a bullet hole looking thing above it.
There was a bomb, and I want to go home, and I can't get out of here. And I'm scared, Donald. I want to come home.
We want to give you a little recap. We're going to try to do that about every 5 minutes or so for those of you who are just joining us, who are just waking up across the time zones of the United States. A bomb went off about 1:25 this morning at Olympic Centennial Park in Atlanta. 2 people are dead. One of them is a cameraman for Turkish television. He suffered a heart attack, I'm told. The other is a woman who has not yet been identified. More than 100 people injured, many with lacerations and fractures from shrapnel. The bomb went off in the midst of a crowd that was gathered to hear a free concert. Investigators say there were 3 pipe bombs in what was described as a military-style knapsack, along with a Tupperware container filled with nails. Someone called 911 a few minutes before the blast. Evacuation efforts began, but it was too late. The International Olympic Committee has announced that the games will go on. But the FBI says that the Olympic venues, the places where the games are being held, the stadiums, the swimming areas and so forth, will be sanitized. In other words, they will use dogs, they will search just as they do on a routine way when the President of the United States goes anywhere to speak. The FBI agent in charge in Atlanta is Agent Woody Johnson. Here is the first assessment he gave of the situation about 3:30 this morning.
At approximately 1:25 a.m. this morning, an explosive device detonated in the Centennial Park downtown. As you also should be aware, that is a public park, an open area that can be visited by any of the people that are here for the Olympic Games. It is not a secure venue area. The sequence of events, as we have information at this point, is that while a police officer had been called to a portion of the park near the NBC stand to deal with some individuals who are a bit unruly, he noticed a suspicious package, requested at that point that explosive ordnance personnel who we have stationed close by come to the scene. Those individuals from the explosive ordnance group arrived at the scene, took a look at the package, were suspicious that it might be an explosive device, and immediately began to move people away from the area. Before they were able to clear the area, the device went off. Along with people that were in attendance at the park at that time, law enforcement officers who were close by were also injured. At this point, we understand that we have 110 injured and 2 people who have died. We have been working for literally years in preparation from a law enforcement perspective to prepare for these games. We immediately responded appropriately. The FBI will take the lead in the investigation. We will consider it an act of terrorism until information should arrive to the contrary. We have now cordoned off the park area. We have brought specialists in dealing with explosives. We have brought an evidence response team in. Our explosive ordnance and evidence response people who are on the ground have begun the investigative effort, are also people that were involved in the bombing in New York and in Oklahoma City. They have a great deal of experience working these types of investigations. At this point, as we sit here, I have no additional information about other threats or devices.
That, of course, was Woody Johnson, who is the FBI agent in charge. He released those facts, held that briefing about 3:30 this morning. Frankly, there's been very little new information since then, except that we now know that someone called a 911 number in Atlanta and warned of the bomb. That was the first tip that people had. That call is now being examined. It has been, tapes of it have been forwarded to Washington. Experts are going over it. We have no real information about what the content of the call was. There have also been no arrests that we know of to date connected, or to this hour, connected with this, nor has any group at this point claimed responsibility, nor has anyone even suggested at this point that there was a connection between this incident and the TWA explosion earlier in the week. When this first happened, people were absolutely dazed in Atlanta. People who were there, tourists who'd come to see the Olympics. We want to show you some of those early reactions.
We don't know what to do. We're just kind of walking around in a daze right now. We're trying to figure out what we can do. We may have to go home.
But the games will go on.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they will.
And you still come?
Yeah.
We have tickets tomorrow night.
We have tickets tomorrow night to the gymnastics, and we'll be there. We won't let it stop us.
Were you ever concerned about the security around the area?
No.
So this comes as a shock to you.
Well, yeah, it's a shock, but, you know, we're not going to let one idiot stop us from doing what we want to do.
And indeed, the Olympic officials announced about 3:30 this morning that the games would go on. The games will not be canceled. They will go on, but the FBI tells us all of the venues now will be sanitized. There will be searches before the games begin at all of the separate places, and there will be bomb dogs, the explosive sniffing dogs, the whole regalia now at every single Olympic venue. We're told that President Clinton at this very moment is being briefed by officials in Atlanta and by security officials in Washington about all of this. He is going to make an address to the nation at 10:06 this morning. Before he speaks, let's check in on the international reaction to all of this. Vicki Mabry is standing by in London with that. Vicki?
Bob, President Clinton has been receiving a stream of messages and telegrams from world leaders. He received one from Pope John Paul II, who called the act senseless. He also sent condolences to the families of those killed. Russian President Boris Yeltsin condemned the bombing as a barbaric act against the whole world community, he said, because it is indeed the entire world which has sent its best athletes to Atlanta. French President Jacques Chirac calls it a cowardly act and says this gives further impetus to an anti-terrorism conference.
And good morning once again, everyone. You're watching Eyewitness News and our special coverage of the bombing incident in Atlanta. We're going to be breaking away now from CBS for a few moments.
We're going